The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Rosie's Roadhouse, a truck-stop diner that had served travelers for 43 years. Steam rose from coffee cups and windows, and the gentle hum of conversation mixed with the clatter of silverware on ceramic plates. It was the kind of peaceful Saturday morning that small towns are built on until the sound of a revving engine shattered the tranquility. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A midnight black Lamborghini HuracÃ pulled into the parking lot like a predator stalking prey, its engine roaring with the arrogance of youth and money. The music thumping from inside was so loud, it rattled the windows of nearby cars. Behind the wheel sat Cameron Pierce, 19 years old, heir to a real estate fortune, and convinced that the world existed solely for his entertainment. If you believe in treating people with dignity, no matter their circumstances, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and share this video, because what happens next will remind you that sometimes karma comes wearing leather and riding steel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story needs to reach every corner of America. Inside Rosie's Roadhouse, Sarah Chin moved between tables with practiced efficiency, despite the titanium rod that ran through her left leg, a permanent reminder of her service in Afghanistan. At 28 years old, Sarah carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced real adversity and emerged stronger, not bitter. She'd been working at Rosie's for 2 years now, ever since her medical discharge from the Army Corps of Engineers. The injury that ended her military career had also shattered her dreams of becoming a structural engineer, but Sarah refused to let it define her. She walked with a slight limp, her left leg never quite bending the way it should, but her smile remained warm, her service swift, and her heart unbroken. The regular customers loved her. Truck drivers called her Angel because she always remembered how they liked their coffee. Families with children appreciated her patience when little ones couldn't decide between pancakes and waffles. Elderly couples found comfort in her gentle way of asking about their grandchildren while refilling their coffee cups. But Sarah carried invisible wounds too. The nightmares that still came some nights, filled with the sound of explosions and the screams of wounded soldiers, the phantom pain that shot through her damaged leg when storms were coming. The carefully hidden struggle of making ends meet on a waitress's salary while paying for physical therapy and prescription medications that the VA didn't quite cover. She wore her pain like armor present, but invisible, protective but not defensive. Every morning, she pinned her small American flag pin to her uniform, just above her name tag, a quiet reminder of service, sacrifice, and the oath she'd taken to defend something bigger than herself. Cameron Pierce stepped out of his Lamborghini wearing clothes that cost more than Sarah made in 3 months. His designer sunglasses reflected the morning sun as he surveyed the modest diner with the kind of disdain reserved for people who had never worked a day in their lives. At 19, Cameron had been given everything except the one thing that mattered: someone to tell him no and mean it. His father, Richard Pierce, owned half the commercial real estate in the state and had built an empire on the philosophy that money solved all problems. His mother, Victoria, spent her days at charity galas where she wrote checks to feel good about herself while remaining carefully insulated from the people those charities actually served. Cameron's Instagram feed was a monument to excess: private jets, exotic cars, $1,000 dinners, and the kind of staged philanthropy that looked good in photos but never required actual human contact with those less fortunate. He had 180,000 followers who fed his ego with likes and comments that reinforced his belief that he was inherently superior to ordinary people. But underneath the designer clothes and artificial confidence, Cameron was hollow. Desperate for attention, addicted to validation, and terrified that without his father's money, he was nothing. His cruelty wasn't born from strength euro. It was the weapon of someone who had never learned to build his self-worth from anything real. He'd been expelled from 2 prep schools for bullying incidents that his father's lawyers had made disappear. His most recent suspension from Stanford had been for organizing a hazing incident that sent a scholarship student to the hospital. Each time, money had smoothed over the consequences, ensuring that Cameron never had to face the reality of his actions. Today, he was hungover, irritated, and looking for someone to take it out on. The universe was about to give him exactly what he thought he wanted a euro, and exactly what he deserved. 25 miles outside town, at the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club's compound, 50 Harley-Davidson motorcycles sat in perfect formation. This wasn't some Hollywood fantasy of outlaws and criminals a euro. These were working men who had found brotherhood in chrome and steel, honor in their patches, and purpose in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Big Jim Morrison, the club's president, stood 6'4" and carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had never needed to prove his strength because everyone could see it. At 51, his gray beard was carefully trimmed, his leather vest adorned with patches that told the story of 29 years riding with the Brotherhood. The scar across his left cheek came from a bar fight in 1998 when he defended a woman from her abusive ex-husband. Beside him stood Diesel McKenzie, the club's sergeant-at-arms, whose hands bore the calluses of 30 years as a mechanic and the gentle touch that came from raising 3 daughters as a single father. Tank Williams, the treasurer, ran a successful construction company and employed half the unemployed veterans in the county. Doc Patterson was an actual doctor a euro, a trauma surgeon who volunteered at the free clinic and had saved more lives than he could count. These weren't movie villains or stereotypes. They were fathers, grandfathers, business owners, and community pillars who happened to find family in the rumble of Harley engines and the code of brotherhood that demanded they stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Every second Saturday of the month, they rode together to Rosie's Roadhouse. It had become tradition after Rosie herself a euro. The original owner a euro had died 3 years earlier, leaving the diner to her niece. They came to support local business, to remember a woman who had fed them for decades, and to enjoy the kind of simple breakfast that tasted better when shared with brothers. But this morning would be different. This morning, their tradition would become a reckoning. Cameron pushed through the door of Rosie's Roadhouse like he owned the place, his 3 friends trailing behind him like pilot fish following a shark. Chad Worthington III, Preston Hamilton Clark, and Blake Kensington a euro trust fund babies, all each more useless than the last, united only by their shared belief that wealth made them inherently superior to the working class. They'd been partying at Cameron's lake house since Friday night, a weekend bacchanal of expensive liquor, designer drugs, and the kind of behavior that money could usually make disappear. None of them had slept. All of them were still intoxicated, and they were hungry for entertainment of the cruel variety. The diner went quiet as they entered, not because anyone recognized them, but because their energy was wrong. Predatory. The kind of tension that made mothers pull their children closer and made working men's hands curl into fists. Sarah noticed them immediately. 24 months of serving tables had given her an instinct for trouble, and these 4 screamed danger from every designer thread. But she'd faced worse than entitled rich kids in Afghanistan. She'd served under mortar fire and treated wounded soldiers while explosions shook the ground beneath her feet. 4 drunk teenagers didn't scare her. She grabbed 4 menus and approached their table with professional courtesy, her slight limp barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. Her voice was warm but careful, the tone of someone who had learned to diffuse situations before they escalated. "Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Rosie's. Can I start you off with some coffee?" Cameron looked up from his phone, his eyes scanning Sarah with the kind of calculation that made her skin crawl. He took in her uniform, her name tag, her flag pin, and a euro. She could see the exact moment to euro her limp. His face lit up with that particular expression that bullies get when they find the perfect victim. Well, he said, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "Look what we've got here. You hurt yourself, sweetheart? Have a little accident?" The table of truck drivers in the corner booth went silent. The elderly couple by the window stopped talking. Even the cook in the kitchen seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, because the sizzling of bacon suddenly seemed too loud. Sarah's smile didn't waver. though something cold settled in her stomach. "I'm fine, thank you. Just here to take your order when you're ready." But Cameron wasn't done. He never was. People like Cameron didn't know when to stop because they'd never had to learn. "Bet you've got some stories, huh? Let me guess, a Euro car accident? Maybe you were texting." While driving, his friend snickered, emboldened by his cruelty. Or, "Wait, why to Euro? I bet you were drunk. DUI, right? That's why you're stuck working in a place like this." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, but she'd endured worse in basic training. She'd been screamed at by drill sergeants who could make grown men cry, and she'd learned that the best response to cruelty was dignity. "I'll give you a few more minutes to look at the menu," she said quietly, turning to walk away. That's when Cameron made his first real mistake. He stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor, and his voice carried across the entire diner. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Gimp. Don't walk away from me." The word landed like a slap. Gimp, a word that reduced her service, her sacrifice, her humanity to nothing more than a punchline for his entertainment. Sarah stopped walking, not because she was intimidated, but because 24 months of taking care of everyone. Elsa Euro customers, the diner, her own wounded body a Euro, had taught her that sometimes you had to take a stand. She turned around slowly, her brown eyes meeting his with the kind of steady gaze that had once stared down enemy combatants. "Sir, I'm going to ask you once to keep your voice down and treat the other customers with respect. If you can't do that, I'll need to ask you to leave." Cameron's face flushed red. Being called out by a waitress with a limp, in front of his friends, in front of a diner full of witnesses a Euro, his ego couldn't handle it. This was supposed to be easy. She was supposed to be submissive, apologetic, grateful for his attention, even if it was cruel. "You're going to ask me to leave?" His voice cracked with disbelief and fury. "Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea what I'm worth? I could buy this shithole diner and bulldoze it just for fun." He pulled out his phone, the screen already recording. Because if he was going to destroy someone, it needed to be captured for his followers. Content was content, and humiliation got views. "This is what happens when people forget their place," he said to the camera, making sure his face was visible, making sure everyone knew he was proud of what he was about to do. "Some broken-down waitress thinks she can tell me what to do." 25 miles away, Big Jim Morrison's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Rosie's niece, Lisa, who managed the diner now. 3 words that would change everything. "Need help." Now, Big Jim raised his fist in the air, Euro the signal. 50 Harley-Davidson engines roared to life as one, creating a thunder that shook the ground and rattled windows for miles. The Iron Brotherhood was riding, and hell was coming with them. But inside Rosie's Roadhouse, nobody knew help was coming. All Sarah knew was that this entitled child was pointing a camera at her like a weapon, and she was about to become the target of whatever cruelty his diseased imagination could conjure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Cameron circled Sarah like a predator that had cornered its prey. His phone held high, the red recording light blinking like a warning that nobody heeded. His friends had their phones out too now, creating a semicircle of cameras, turning Sarah's humiliation into a multi-angle production. "Tell the world what happened to your leg," Cameron demanded, his voice carrying across the silent diner. "Come on, share with the class. What makes someone so pathetic that they end up limping around, taking orders from their betters?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I served my country in Afghanistan. I was injured by an IED while helping to build a school for children." The word should have shamed him, should have made him step back, apologize, recognize that he was attacking someone who had sacrificed more for strangers than he had ever sacrificed for anyone. Instead, Cameron's eyes lit up with delight. "Oh, this is even better." He spun the camera toward his own face, grinning with the kind of manic energy that came from knowing he'd found the perfect victim. A fake war hero. Probably never left the base, right? Probably got hurt in some training accident, and now pretends to be a combat veteran for sympathy. The truck drivers in the corner booth were rising from their seats now, their faces dark with anger. One of them, a Vietnam veteran named Pete, who'd been coming to Rosie's for 15 years, was already reaching for his wallet to pay his check so he could leave before he did something that would land him in jail. But Sarah held up her hand, a gesture so subtle that only Pete caught it. A slight shake of the head that said, "I've got this." Because she did have it. She'd faced worse than this child's tantrum in places he couldn't imagine, with people, depending on her, that he would never be brave enough to protect. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Sarah said quietly. "Your opinion of my service doesn't change what I did or who I am." That dignity, that refusal to be broken, drove Cameron into a rage. He was supposed to be the predator here. She was supposed to cry, to beg, to give him the emotional reaction he needed to feel powerful. Instead, she stood there like a soldier, unbowed and unbroken, making him feel small in ways that money couldn't fix. "Oh, you think you're better than me?" Cameron stepped closer, invading her space, his breath reeking of alcohol and privilege. "You think your little participation trophy from the army makes you special? Let me tell you what you are, Euro. You're a broken-down waitress with a gimpy leg, taking orders and cleaning up after people like me because that's all you're good for." Then he did something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Cameron looked directly into his phone camera, making sure his face was visible, making sure his followers would see how edgy and fearless he was. Then he gathered saliva in his mouth, his lips curling with deliberate cruelty, and spat directly onto Sarah's uniform shirt. The projectile landed just above her American flag pin, the liquid sliding down the fabric like a violation made visible. The sound it made hitting her shirt Euro wet, sharp, obscene Euro cut through the silence like a gunshot. For 3 seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The entire diner existed in a bubble of suspended horror, everyone processing what they had just witnessed, but nobody quite believing it. Sarah looked down at the spit slowly soaking through her uniform, then back up at Cameron's face. Her expression didn't change a Euro, no tears, no rage, no breakdown that would give him the satisfaction he craved. Instead, something terrible and quiet passed across her features. The look of someone who had just watched the last bit of faith in human decency die right in front of her. "You'll want to leave now," she said softly, her voice carrying a warning that Cameron was too arrogant to recognize. But Cameron wasn't done. He never was. He turned back to his phone, grinning at the camera like he'd just accomplished something wonderful. "Did everyone see that? That's how you handle people who don't know their place. Share this video. Let everyone know what happens when a Euro." That's when they heard it. The sound started as a distant rumble, like thunder rolling across a summer sky. But it didn't fade the way thunder does a Euro. It grew louder, closer, more insistent. The windows of Rosie's Roadhouse began to vibrate in their frames. Coffee cups rattled against saucers. The floor itself seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched the beating of 50 hearts united in purpose. Cameron stopped talking mid-sentence, his phone still recording but forgotten as the sound grew from rumble to roar to something that felt like the earth itself was angry. Outside, the first Harley-Davidson appeared on the horizon, followed by another, then another, until the highway looked like a river of chrome and steel flowing toward the diner. Big Jim Morrison led the formation, his massive frame commanding a bike that seemed too small beneath him. His face was set in stone, his eyes focused on the destination with the intensity of a man who had received a distress call from family. Because that's what Sarah was to the Iron Brotherhood of Euro family. They'd been coming to Rosie's for 3 years, and Sarah had served them with the same respect she showed everyone else, never asking for special treatment because of their patches, never flinching at their appearance or reputation. Behind Big Jim rode 49 of his brothers, their engines creating a symphony of American steel and righteous anger. These weren't young hotshots looking for trouble a Euro. These were seasoned men who had learned the difference between violence and justice, between intimidation and protection. As they pulled into the parking lot, their formation was perfect, practiced, intimidating without being threatening. They arranged themselves in a semicircle around the diner's entrance, engines idling, creating a wall of leather and chrome that blocked any easy escape. Inside the diner, Cameron's face had gone pale. His phone was shaking in his hand as he watched through the window, while 50 bikers dismounted their machines with the precision of a military unit. His friends were already backing toward the rear exit, their earlier bravado evaporating like smoke. "Dude, we need to go," Chad whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "We need to go right now." But Cameron was frozen, his brain struggling to process the mathematics of the situation. 50 bikers, 4 of them, one spit-covered waitress who had somehow summoned an army with nothing more than dignity and quiet strength. The door to Rosie's Roadhouse opened, and Big Jim Morrison stepped inside. At 6'4" and 260 pounds, Big Jim commanded attention without demanding it. His leather vest bore patches that told a story: a Euro Iron Brotherhood president, 29 years of service, a Purple Heart from Desert Storm that he rarely talked about but always carried. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, his movements deliberate and controlled. He didn't look at Cameron immediately. Instead, his eyes found Sarah, who was still standing in the center of the diner with spit drying on her uniform. His face softened for just a moment, concern replacing anger, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "You all right, darling?" Sarah nodded, though they both knew it was a lie. "I'm fine, Big Jim. Just dealing with some customers who forgot their manners." Big Jim's attention shifted to Cameron then, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His eyes saw a Euro, pale blue, and utterly, without warmth, a Euro locked onto the teenager's face with the intensity of a laser sight. "Son," Big Jim said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to raise it to be heard. "I think you and I need to have a conversation." The door opened again, and Diesel McKenzie entered, followed by Tank Williams, then Doc Patterson, then more brothers than the diner could comfortably hold. They filled the space like a tide of leather and steel, not crowding anyone, not threatening anyone, just present. A physical reminder that Sarah Chen was not alone, had never been alone, and would never be alone again. Cameron's phone was still recording, capturing every second of his world falling apart in high definition. His followers were about to get a masterclass in what happened when privilege met justice, when cruelty encountered honor. When a spoiled child discovered that actions have consequences. Big Jim walked toward Cameron with the measured pace of a man who had all the time in the world, and all the moral authority in the universe. Each step echoed in the silent diner, creating a countdown that everyone could feel, but no one could stop. Cameron's friends had evaporated like mist, slipping out the back door and leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. The phone in his hand was still recording. Though he'd forgotten about it entirely, his brain focused on the immediate problem of being surrounded by 50 very large, very angry men who clearly knew exactly what he'd done. "Put the phone down, son," Big Jim said when he was close enough that Cameron could see the flecks of gold in his pale blue eyes. It wasn't a request. Cameron's hand opened reflexively, and the phone clattered to the floor, the screen cracking on impact. The recording light flickered once and went dark, taking with it any chance he had of controlling the narrative of what was about to happen. "What's your name?" Big Jim asked, his voice conversational, like they were old friends, catching up over coffee. "Cameron," the teenager managed to croak out, his voice cracking like he was 13 again instead of 19. "Cameron what?" "Pierce." "Cameron Pierce." Big Jim nodded slowly, as if the name confirmed something he'd suspected. "Pierce. As in Pierce Development? As in the company that's been trying to buy out small businesses all over the county so they can build another shopping mall?" Cameron nodded miserably, beginning to understand that his father's reputation might not be the shield he'd always assumed it was. "Your daddy know you're here." "Cameron Pierce? Know you're spitting on disabled veterans for internet points?" The words hit like physical blows. Cameron had never heard his actions described so plainly, so accurately, so devastatingly. Spitting on disabled veterans. That's what he'd done. That's what he was. I didn't. She's not. She's not what? Big Jim's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the velvet now. Not disabled? Not a veteran? Not a human being deserving of basic respect? Around the diner, the other brothers had positioned themselves strategically. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present. Creating a wall of witness, ensuring that this moment would be remembered correctly, that justice would be served properly. Diesel McKenzie stepped forward, his calloused hands crossed over his chest. Cameron Pierce, let me tell you about Sarah Chan. She enlisted in the Army Corps of Engineers when she was 18 years old. Spent 4 years building schools, hospitals, and infrastructure in Afghanistan. She was wounded when an IED exploded near the convoy she was traveling with. The shrapnel that ended her military career also saved the lives of 3 children who were playing nearby. Cameron's face had gone white. This wasn't supposed to be how the story went. He was supposed to be the protagonist, the edgy influencer pushing boundaries and getting views. He wasn't supposed to be the friend's villain in someone else's story of genuine heroism. Tank Williams spoke next, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years building things instead of tearing them down. She's been working at this diner for 2 years, never missing a shift, never complaining about her pain, always treating every customer with respect, including us, especially us. The first time we came in here, Doc Patterson added, his surgeon's hands gentle despite their size. She could have been scared, could have called the police, could have asked us to leave. 50 bikers walking into a small-town diner? Most people would be terrified. Sarah brought us coffee and asked about our bikes. Made us feel welcome. Big Jim let the words settle like sediment in still water, giving Cameron time to understand the full scope of what he'd done. This wasn't just about spitting on a Waitress euro. It was about attacking someone who had shown kindness to others, someone who had served her country, someone who embodied everything that Cameron's privileged existence had never taught him to value. Here's what's going to happen now. Cameron Pierce, Big Jim said, and his voice carried the finality of a judge passing sentence. You're going to apologize to Miss Chen. A real apology, not some social media non-apology bullshit. You're going to look her in the eye and acknowledge what you did. Cameron nodded frantically, eager to comply, to do anything that might get him out of this situation alive. But Big Jim wasn't finished. Then you're going to make this right. You're going to volunteer at the Veterans Administration Hospital. 50 hours of community service, and you're going to do it personally, not write a check and let someone else do the work. You're going to push wheelchairs, clean bedpans, and listen to stories from people who actually serve their country. The teenager was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. But the bikers weren't interested in his tears euro. They were interested in his actions. And one more thing, Diesel added, stepping closer. That video you were recording, the one where you spit on a disabled veteran, that's going to disappear. You're going to delete it from every platform, every device, every cloud backup. If we see it surface anywhere, ever, this conversation is going to resume under much less pleasant circumstances. Cameron was nodding before Diesel finished speaking, his head bobbing like a dashboard ornament. Yes, I'll delete everything. I swear. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But Big Jim held up a hand, silencing him. Don't apologize to us, son. We're not the ones you wronged. All eyes turned to Sarah, who had been watching the entire exchange with an expression that was impossible to read. The spit had dried on her uniform now, leaving a dark stain that seemed to glow under the diner's fluorescent lights. She stood, perfectly still, her hands at her sides, waiting. Cameron approached her like a man walking to his own execution, each step requiring tremendous effort. When he was close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, he stopped and tried to find words that could possibly bridge the gap between what he'd done and what he needed to say. Ma'am, His voice cracked again, and he started over. Miss Chen, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. There's no excuse for it. None. You served our country, and I spit on you. I can't take it back, but I want you to know that I understand how wrong it was. Sarah studied his face for a long moment, looking for sincerity beneath the fear, searching for some indication that this moment had actually changed something inside him. What she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once, sharply. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "But this isn't about me forgiving you, Cameron. This is about you forgiving yourself, and that's going to take a lot more work than just saying sorry." Her words hit him harder than any threat the bikers could have made. Forgiveness wasn't something he could buy or demand or manipulate his way into €1. It was something he would have to earn through action, through change, through becoming someone worthy of it. The VA hospital. Sarah continued. "Ask for Dr. Martinez in the prosthetics department. Tell her I sent you. Tell her you want to help, really help, not just putting your time." Cameron nodded, committing the name to memory. "Dr. Martinez? Prosthetics. I'll do whatever she needs." "And Cameron?" Sarah's voice stopped him as he started to turn away. "The next time you see someone who's different, someone who's struggling, someone who doesn't fit your idea of normal, remember this moment. Remember how it feels to be on the wrong side of judgment." The lesson landed with the weight of a falling tree. Cameron had spent his entire life judging others from a position of privilege, never understanding that his wealth and status were accidents of birth, not achievements to be proud of. Sarah's words offered him a different path, a chance to use his experience of shame and humiliation to develop empathy for others. Big Jim stepped forward then, and his voice carried a different tone. €1, not threatening anymore, but not entirely friendly either. "There's one more thing, son. Your daddy's company has been pressuring small business owners all over this county to sell out so he can build his shopping centers. That's going to stop." Cameron's eyes widened. I can't control what my father does." "Maybe not," Tank Williams said, his construction worker's hands folded across his chest. "But you can make sure he knows that his son learned something today about respecting the people who make communities work, about understanding that not everything worthwhile can be bought and sold." It was a challenge wrapped in an facer. Opportunity €1, a chance for Cameron to use his privileged position not to hurt others, but to protect them, to become an advocate instead of an oppressor. "I'll talk to him," Cameron promised, and for the first time, his voice carried conviction instead of fear. "I'll make him understand." Doc Patterson stepped forward, his surgeon's eyes kind but serious. "Change is hard, son, especially when you're fighting against a lifetime of bad habits and worse examples. But you've got something now that you didn't have an hour ago." "What's that?" Cameron asked. "A reason to change that's bigger than yourself." The doctor gestured toward Sarah, who was beginning to move between tables again, checking on customers who had watched the entire drama unfold. Despite everything that had happened, despite the humiliation and the violation, she was still working, still serving, still carrying herself with the quiet dignity that had made 50 bikers ride to her defense. "That woman took an oath to defend people she'd never met," Doc continued. "She nearly died keeping that oath. Today, you attack someone who spent years of her life protecting your right to attack her. Think about that. Think about what kind of person that makes you and what kind of person you want to become." The weight of it was crushing. Cameron had never thought about his freedom as something that other people had bought with their blood, had never considered that his right to speak, to travel, to live without fear came from the sacrifice of soldiers like Sarah. The flag pin on her uniform wasn't just decoration, in clues. It was a reminder of a debt he had never acknowledged, never repaid, never even recognized. "How do I make it right?" Cameron asked, and the question came from somewhere deeper than fear, deeper than shame. It came from a growing understanding that his entire life had been built on a foundation of ignorance and privilege that he could no longer ignore. "One day at a time, big," Jim answered. "One veteran at a time. One moment of choosing to be better than you were." As Cameron absorbed the full weight of his reckoning, something remarkable began to happen in Rosie's Roadhouse. The Iron Brotherhood, these 50 men who had ridden 25 miles to defend one waitress, began to transform from an intimidating presence into something else entirely. Teachers, mentors, living examples of what it meant to choose honor over convenience. Diesel McKenzie pulled out his wallet and placed a $50 bill on the counter, far more than his coffee and pie had cost. For Sarah, he told Lisa, the diner's owner. And for anyone else who works here, people who serve others deserve to be served in return. One by one, the other brothers followed suit, not making a show of it, not demanding recognition, just quietly ensuring that Sarah's workplace understood her value. Within minutes, nearly $2,000 sat on the counter, €1 a month's worth of tips, accumulated in moments of brotherhood. But the real lesson was still coming. Big Jim walked over to Sarah, who was wiping down a table with mechanical precision, her training kicking in to help her process the trauma she'd just experienced. When he spoke, his voice was gentle enough that only she could hear. "You don't have to serve us today, darling. Take some time. Go home. Rest." Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time since Cameron had entered the diner, her composure cracked slightly. "I'm okay, Big Jim. Really, this is my job." "Your job is to serve people who deserve your service," he replied. "And today, you've already served your country in ways that boy will never understand. Let us serve you for a change." Tank Williams approached Cameron, who was still standing in the center of the diner like a storm survivor, taking inventory of the damage. "Come here, son. There's something you need to see." He led Cameron to the wall beside the cash register, where dozens of photographs were displayed in simple frames. Pictures of customers, regulars, people who had made Rosie's Roadhouse feel like home over the decades. And there, in a place of honor, was a photograph of Sarah in her army uniform, standing beside a completed school building in Afghanistan, surrounded by smiling children. "That building," Tank said, pointing to the photograph, "is still standing. Still educating kids, still providing hope in a place where hope is hard to come by. Sarah built that. Her hands, her sweat, her expertise. While you were probably learning to drive luxury cars, she was learning to build futures." Cameron stared at the photograph, seeing Sarah not as the limping waitress he'd attacked, but as the soldier she'd been, the engineer she'd trained to become, the hero she'd never stopped being. The children in the photo were laughing, their faces bright with possibility, and suddenly Cameron understood something that his privileged upbringing had never taught him. True worth wasn't measured in bank accounts or social media followers. It was measured in lives touched, in service given, in sacrifices made for others. By that measure, Sarah Chen was worth more than Cameron could ever hope to pay €1, unless he changed everything about who he was and what he valued. She could have gone to college after her service, Doc Patterson added, joining the conversation. Could have used her GI Bill benefits to become a structural engineer. Probably made good money designing buildings for people like your father. But the injury changed her plans, made some dreams impossible. "So why is she here?" Cameron asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because she refuses to give up," Diesel answered. "She's working, saving money, taking online classes when she can afford them. Still planning to finish her engineering degree, just taking the long way around. That's what real strength looks like, son. Not giving up when life hits you with an IED. Getting up, limping if you have to, and moving forward anyway." The lesson was profound and devastating. Cameron had been handed everything on a silver platter and had used his advantages to hurt others. Sarah had been knocked down by an enemy bomb and had used her recovery to serve others. The contrast was so stark it was almost impossible to comprehend. "Is there anything else I can do?" Cameron asked, and this time the question came from genuine desire to help rather than fear of consequences. "Besides the VA hospital, is there anything else?" Big Jim studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity of the question against the magnitude of the offense. What he saw in Cameron's face must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "Sarah's been trying to save money for a laptop computer. Needs it for her online classes. Engineering software isn't cheap, and the VA benefits don't cover educational technology." Cameron's mind immediately went to his credit cards, to the easy solution that money could provide. But Big Jim seemed to read his thoughts and held up a warning hand. "Don't you dare try to write a check and make this go away," the biker president said firmly. "That's the same thinking that got you into this mess. Money without understanding, charity without connection. If you want to help, you earn the right to help. How? Cameron asked. Start showing up? Tank Williams answered. At the VA hospital, at the diner, in your community. Start seeing people as human beings instead of content for your social media. When you've put in the time, when you've learned what service actually means, then maybe you'll have earned the right to contribute to Sarah's education. It was a roadmap to redemption that would require actual work, actual growth, actual change. Cameron couldn't buy his way out of this €1. He would have to become someone worthy of forgiveness. As the Iron Brotherhood prepared to leave Rosie's Roadhouse, their departure was as coordinated and purposeful as their arrival had been. But first, there was one final moment that would cement this day in the memory of everyone present. Big Jim approached Sarah one last time, his massive frame somehow gentle as he stood before her. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a promise that 50 brothers would keep. Miss Chin, I want you to know something. You've got family now, real family. Anytime, any place, anything you need €1, you call us. That's not charity, that's brotherhood. You've earned it through your service, your character, and your strength. He handed her a business card with his personal number written on the back. Day or night, rain or shine. No veteran stands alone, and no member of our family faces trouble by themselves. Sarah took the card with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that her world had just expanded to include 50 protectors she'd never asked for, but desperately needed. For 2 years, she'd been fighting her battles alone, managing her pain in private, struggling with finances and recovery without support. Suddenly, she had an army. Thank you, she whispered, and the words carried the weight of someone who had been holding up the world alone and had just been offered help carrying the load. One by one, the bikers filed out of the diner, each pausing to nod respectfully to Sarah, many leaving additional tips on the counter, all carrying with them the memory of a woman who had shown them what real courage looked like. Cameron remained behind, his expensive car keys feeling like lead weights in his pocket. The Lamborghini in the parking lot seemed obscene now, a monument to everything shallow and meaningless about his existence. How could he drive away in a car that cost more than Sarah made in 3 years, back to a life of privilege and waste, pretending that this moment had never happened? Cameron, Sarah called, stopping him at the 5 door. When he turned, she was holding out a small piece of paper. That's Dr. Martinez's direct number. Tell her I recommended you for their peer support program. It's for people who want to help veterans process trauma and readjust to civilian life. Cameron took the paper, confused. But I'm not qualified to help with trauma. I don't know anything about what veterans go through. Sarah's smile was sad but hopeful. No, but you know something about shame now. About hitting bottom and needing to rebuild yourself. About being lost and needing to find purpose. Sometimes the people who can help most are the ones who remember what it felt like to need help. The insight was devastating and liberating at the same time. Cameron's humiliation, his rock-bottom moment, could become a source of empathy and connection with others who were struggling. His pain could have purpose. I won't let you down, he promised, and for the first time in his life, he made a commitment that wasn't about his own gratification. I know you won't, Sarah replied. Because now you understand what it costs when you do. The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the parking lot of the Veterans Administration Hospital as Cameron Pierce walked through the sliding glass doors for the family, 127th time in 6 months. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple khakis and a volunteer t-shirt that had seen better days. The designer watch had been sold months ago, the money donated to the hospital's prosthetics fund. Dr. Martinez looked up from her clipboard as Cameron approached the nurse's station. Morning, Cameron. How are you feeling about today? Nervous, he admitted. But good nervous. Ready nervous. Today was special. Today, Cameron was graduating from the peer support training program, earning the right to work one-on-one with veterans who were struggling with the transition back to civilian life. 6 months of cleaning bedpans, pushing wheelchairs, listening to stories, and slowly learning what it meant to put other people's needs before his own had changed him in ways he was still discovering. The first month had been the hardest. Veterans had seen through his privileged facade immediately, calling him out on his condescending tone, his assumption that he could understand their struggles, his unconscious belief that his presence was somehow a gift to them. He'd been humbled, corrected, and educated by people who had every reason to dismiss him, but chose instead to teach him. Now, veterans sought him out, not because he had easy answers or inspiring speeches, but because he listened without judgment, remembered their stories, and showed up consistently, whether they were having good days or bad ones. His own experience of shame and transformation had given him a rare gift to the ability to sit with others in their darkest moments without trying to fix them or rush them toward healing. "There's someone here to see you," Dr. Martinez said, nodding toward the family waiting area. Cameron turned and saw Sarah Chen sitting in one of the plastic chairs, her laptop bag beside her, a stack of engineering textbooks in her lap. She'd been coming to the hospital regularly, not as a patient, but as a volunteer, helping other disabled veterans navigate the complexities of readjustment and recovery. "Hey," she said, standing as he approached. The limp was still there, would always be there, but somehow it seemed less prominent now. Or maybe Cameron had learned to see beyond it to the strength that carried her forward. "Hey yourself," he replied, and their greeting carried the easy familiarity of two people who had been through hell together and come out as friends. "How are the classes going?" Sarah's face lit up. "I got my acceptance letter yesterday. Full engineering program, starting next semester. The VA came through with additional education benefits, and with a laptop fund the Brotherhood set up." She trailed off, emotion making her voice thick. The laptop fund. It had been Big Jim's idea. A way for the Iron Brotherhood to support Sarah's education without making her feel like charity case. Contributions from 50 bikers, their families, and word-of-mouth donations from other veterans had quickly grown into enough money not just for a laptop, but for textbooks, software, and a small monthly stipend to help with living expenses while she focused on her studies. "You're going to be an amazing engineer," Cameron said. And he meant it completely. Those kids in Afghanistan already proved that. Sarah studied his face, noting the changes that 6 months of real work and genuine purpose had carved into his features. The arrogance was gone, replaced by humility. The cruelty had been burned away, leaving empathy in its place. The shallow boy who had spit on her uniform had become a man who understood what service meant. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small, American flag pin, identical to the one she wore on her own uniform. "I want you to have this." Cameron's breath caught. "Sarah, I can't. I haven't earned the right to wear that." "Yes, you have," she said firmly. "Maybe not through military service, but through something just as important. You've learned to serve others. You've turned your worst moment into your best purpose. That's what this flag represents a euro. People who choose to be better than they were, who sacrifice for others, who stand up when it would be easier to stay down." Cameron took the pin with trembling hands, understanding the weight of what he was receiving. Not just a piece of metal and fabric, but a symbol of belonging, of purpose, of becoming worthy of the freedom that others had died to protect. As he pinned it to his volunteer shirt, just above his name tag, Sarah spoke one final lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life. "Real strength isn't about never falling down, Cameron. It's about getting back up and helping others do the same. Keep getting back up, keep helping others. That's how you honor the second chance you've been given." Outside, the rumble of 50 Harley-Davidson motorcycles announced the arrival of the Iron Brotherhood, coming for their monthly visit to the hospital. Cameron and Sarah walked to the window and watched as Big Jim Morrison and his brothers parked in their familiar formation, preparing to spend the afternoon with veterans who needed reminding that they weren't forgotten. "Ready to face the Brotherhood?" Sarah asked with a smile. Cameron nodded, his hand unconsciously touching the flag pin on his chest. "Yeah, I think I finally am." As they walked toward the lobby together, the veteran who had taught him about dignity, And the young man who had learned to transform shame into purpose a euro, Cameron understood that this wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a life measured not in dollars or followers or possessions, but in service given, people helped, and the daily choice to be better than he had been. The Iron Brotherhood had taught him that no veteran stands alone. Sarah had taught him that no one who chooses redemption has to face it alone either. And as the motorcycles rumbled to silence and 50 leather-clad protectors walked through the hospital doors, Cameron Pierce stepped forward to meet them a euro, not as the spoiled child he had been, but as the man he was still becoming. In the end, that was the real lesson of Rosie's Roadhouse. Not that actions have consequence a euro, any fool could learn that. But that consequences could have purpose, that shame could become strength, and that the worst moment of your life could become the first day of who you were meant to be. The thunder of brotherhood had answered Sarah's silent call for justice 6 months ago. Today, it returned to witness what justice, tempered with mercy and seasoned with hope, could create. A young man, transformed, a veteran supported, and a community reminded that real strength comes not from what you can destroy, but from what you choose to build. And in a small diner, 25 miles away, where Sarah's photograph still hung beside the cash register, and where the Iron Brotherhood still gathered for breakfast every second Saturday, the lesson continued to echo in the rumble of engines, and the clatter of coffee cups, and the quiet dignity of ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary in the simple act of treating each other with respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.